Thank you very much for inviting me. And in a little bit of sort of a response to David Markowitz's talk last time, I wanted to talk a little bit about older people and how often they lie. So David spoke last time about why young men seem to lie more. And I think that was an interesting question, and he got interesting questions from the audience as well. So I thought, well, I don't know about men, but I do have some data, currently unpublished data on lying across the lifespan, which I just thought might be interesting for, well, for everybody really, considering David's question was quite interesting. So I started this study, really small study, a little bit of a side project, about 2 or 3 years ago. And my hypothesis at the time was that there's a good literature on older adults lying less or lying being more frequent in young men. And when I started this study, I thought that this was a situational thing, so that it isn't that somehow young men are inherently dishonest, but rather what's going on is that young men just happen to be in situations in which lying is beneficial. And in my particular study, I didn't look at gender, just purely age. And in essence, my personal hypothesis was that as we age, we are simply less often in situations where we can lie. As we become older, you can imagine when you're 15 or 16, you might do a lot of lying to your parents, to school teachers, because they're like, have you eaten your vegetables? Have you done your homework? And you do things like, yes, I did, because that's beneficial. And when you're like 30, you can just say to your mom, no, mom, I haven't eaten any vegetables. Besides, I'm 30 now, and you don't have to ask me this question anymore. So what I did is, sorry, I didn't create slides for all of the design because I figured I only have 13 minutes. But what I did to study this, or what I thought would help, is if I asked people in the exact same situation, would they lie or not? So what I did is I did an online study in which, first of all, I asked people to rate how often they lie. So they basically did a little Sirota grid. And I also just asked them outright, do you lie a lot? And then there were a series of scenarios. And the question basically was, well, if you were this person in this scenario, would you lie? And then if they said yes, we asked them a series of questions. Now, how would you feel about that lie? Do you think the person would believe you? How difficult would that lie be? Etc. And then I created 3 different versions of that questionnaire. One suitable for children in school, one suitable for university students, and one suitable for adults. So basically, the school version would talk about schools and teachers and fellow classmates, while the adult version would talk about work and bosses and colleagues. And then we sent the questionnaire out locally in the northwest of England. So the school version was filled in by children at a local A-level college. The university students came from our university, and the older adults came from a database we have of older adults who are interested in helping us out with research. So that gave me sort of a sample of the over 60, and then that sort of mid-range, middle adult group was mostly recruited via Facebook. So it's not a completely balanced sample, but basically we kept asking until we got to a reasonable sample size. I think in total the sample size is 140, 145 or something like that. But what I wanted to show the audience today is, first of all, whether people were consistent between the different ways I asked them, how often do you lie? So I once asked them, the lies 24-hour column is the Sirota grid answers. The scenario lies is just the number of scenarios they said to, yes, I would lie. There was a maximum of 9 there. And then we also asked them, just in general, how often do you lie? And you see that the correlation between how often do you lie in the Sirota grid is quite good. But this correlation between those 2 things in the scenarios isn't actually that high. So like this sort of how often do you lie in the last 24 hours doesn't seem to be entirely predictive of how often they say they would lie if they were in these specific situations, which does suggest to me that the scenarios are perhaps, you know, not that common in daily life. So then what do we get to the actual results? In my case, the x-axis of this graph is now cut off by a warning that says that I am on Zoom. But on the x-axis, you see age. From the youngest person was 15, I think, and the oldest person was, I want to say 87 or something like that. And on the y-axis, you see their answer of the numbers of lies that they answered in the Soroda grid, so across a day. So you see the line projected, indicating there is a downward trend. You also see that it's not very equally divided. There's like most of the people are sitting in, you know, below 10, and then you get a couple of outliers. And you do say that in the teenage group, there's more outliers than in the older group, except for that one person who's quite a high outlier in the 80 group. I looked her up, she's 83. I quite like her. I don't know who she is, but I quite like her. So when it comes to the scenarios, we had a series of 9 scenarios, which differed quite a lot in how many people said that they would lie if they were in that scenario. And we did that deliberately. We tried to design scenarios that would trigger differences. So the scenario that drew the least amount of lies was a scenario in which they borrowed something from a friend, like something special from that friend, and then they'd broken it. And then the question was, well, would you lie and pretend that somebody else broke it? And only 10% of people said, yes, I'd lie. And then the other was sort of, on the other end, we get this almost default scenario where we realize you're taking part in a psychology experiment and the experimenter is asking you to lie. Would you do that? And 90% of people said they would lie. So you see there's quite a sort of range in the scenarios. So then when it comes to the age effect, what does that look like? And for almost all scenarios, we see that older adults lie less. This is the beta coefficient of the predictor here. The only scenario in which older adults don't lie less is the psychology experiment scenario. And you see that for some of the scenarios, the difference is quite small. But at the other end, you get the scenario like lie to your boss to cover for a friend's or colleague's absence. And older adults are just saying, I would lie much less than younger adults there. So there is a real difference across the scenarios in the age effect as well. But except for the psychology experiment scenario, all the scenarios show an age effect in the expected direction. So then the question is, why do older adults lie less? So my original hypothesis that this would be due to the situation or due to the scenario was basically disproved, because I thought that in the same scenario there wouldn't be a difference, but there clearly is. So then I looked at, obviously when we gave them the scenario, we asked them, oh, you know, how would you feel if you do that? And one of the things we asked them is we'd ask them to rate how guilty they would feel if they lied. And then we see, this graph is similar to the one you saw previously, age on the x-axis, how guilty they would feel on the y-axis, that older people report higher feelings of guilt when they say they would lie in a scenario. So this might be an explanation why they lie less, because if it makes you feel guilty, you might be inclined to say, oh no, I'm not going to lie as often. Older adults also rate lies as more difficult. So we asked them, how difficult would you find it to lie in this situation? They also rated that higher, although the effect isn't that large. It's only like 1 point on the 7-point scale for difficulty. So this is a smaller effect. We also asked them whether they thought they would be believed, but there isn't an age effect on that. So in conclusion, older adults report being more honest, not just in their daily lives, but also in specific scenarios. So that means that my original hypothesis that this is just a situational thing isn't true. In fact, there do seem to be underlying moral or cognitive reasons for why older adults are more honest. And I think that's quite nice and quite exciting. And one day I hope I will have time to do some more research into why older adults are more honest, and whether this is purely an aging effect or whether this is a cohort effect. So I have spoken to older adults about this, and they tend to say that it's a cohort effect. It's not that they got more honest as they age, it's just that they were raised proper by their parents back in the day. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll try and get rid of the slides now.